Let's talk about stamp duty, because it seems that the Deputy Prime Minister, at the time of recording, Angela Rayner, has got herself into some trouble over it, and it raises a few interesting questions. For most home buyers, stamp duty is pretty straightforward. It's a tax based on the property price, and the higher the price of the property, the more stamp duty you pay. At its most basic, the first $125,000 of the price is taxed at 0%. Next $125,000, or the portion of it from $125,001 to $250,000, is 2%. Next $675,000 is taxed at 5%. There are more bands after this, but in Northern Ireland, these are the ones we tend to look at most regularly. It becomes a bit more complicated if the buyer owns, or as Deputy Prime Minister has apparently just discovered, has a legal interest in other residential property. If the buyer does own or have an interest in another property, then unless they're literally moving house on the same day, i.e. selling their old home and buying their new home, they will be treated as buying an additional residence, and they'll have to pay 5% on top of the stamp duty rates that I've just mentioned. And this is where things get a bit more complicated, so stick with me here. Miss Rayner had claimed that the flat in Hove was the only one she owned. She'd previously forfeited her stake in the family home in Ashton-under-Lyne. However, because the family home was in a trust, with her children as the beneficiaries, she, as a trustee, retained an interest in the property, which meant that the Hove flat was an additional dwelling, and that means that she should have paid stamp duty at a higher rate, which in the Deputy Prime Minister's case meant another $40,000 over the $30,000 she'd already declared and paid. The conveyancing firm Verico and Associates from Herne Bay in Kent have confirmed at the Daily Telegraph that they used HMRC's online stamp duty calculator based on the information and figures given by Angela Rayner. They've also confirmed and state clearly that they don't give tax advice. And last night, the other two solicitor firms involved with the Deputy Prime Minister's Ashton-under-Lyne property also confirmed that they hadn't given any tax advice. In my experience, in the vast majority of cases, if the solicitor is given the right information and it's comprehensive, we will normally be able to advise the buyer what the correct rate of stamp duty should be and the amount that's going to be payable. Like the other conveyancing firms I've mentioned, we don't provide expert tax advice, but in 99% of cases we don't need to, because the calculation is straightforward and obvious. We submit the return to HMRC, but with the buyer's authority, and the responsibility remains with them to make sure it's correct. I think it's also important to point out that as the Deputy Prime Minister tries to throw her legal advisors under the bus, most solicitors will not carry around all of the technical exceptions and conditions in their heads, but we will know exactly where to look for the answer. The HMRC Stamp Duty Manual online, not exactly a rip-roaring page-turner, at least gives fairly clear directions on how certain circumstances should be treated, and most solicitors will refer to this. As a solicitor who has specialised in residential property for over 25 years, I find it at best surprising and at worst not credible that a complete assessment of the facts as supplied by the Deputy Prime Minister would not have resulted in the correct treatment for stamp duty purposes. Conversely, if the full facts of the Deputy Prime Minister's living circumstances were not readily available and clearly understood, it's certainly possible that the tax calculation would be incorrect. There are lots of other scenarios that occur in day-to-day life where the stamp duty calculation isn't entirely straightforward. But if the information is given honestly and comprehensively, then as a law firm, we have never failed to get the right answer for the client. Do you have any queries about stamp duty? Comment here and we'll reply to some of your questions.